Good morning, everyone. Apologies in advance if I don't smile as much today as I usually do. I was out walking around this beautiful city last night, and it was quite cold, and my face actually froze solid, and it's not completely thawed out yet. But I do appreciate the invitation to talk about one of my passion projects, which is ALSUntangled, and I call this talk Help for the Internet Buyers Club. So a little bit of background. I've been coming to this meeting now for 23 years, I believe, and it's great to see that every year we make progress and there's new options. Unfortunately, I would say that each option, maybe with the exception of tofersen, produces an incremental benefit. I think someday these are all going to add up and we'll be making a big dent in this disease. But for now, people with this disease, unfortunately, many of them have rapidly progressive disability and a shortened survival. And so it's not at all surprising that people living with ALS, I'll abbreviate that PALS, they want access to experimental therapies. Of course they do. And we should understand that there are different pathways for getting that access. Clinical trials, expanded access programs, and self-experimentation with a group of products that I call alternative and off-label treatments. And so my favorite pathway for my patients to access experimental therapies is through clinical trials. Why? Well, we know a lot about the products. We know that they have plausible mechanisms of action. We know about their purity. There's an informed consent process. There's a lot of oversight from the FDA, from the IRB, from data safety monitoring boards, so that patient safety is protected. There's rigorous data collection, so we all learn something. The field moves forward when people experiment through clinical trials. And there are benefits to people who participate in clinical trials. Hope, my new favorite topic. Someday I'd like to come back and talk to you about the things I've learned about hope. Altruism. And there are also medical benefits. Interestingly, across almost every disease where this has been studied, people who participate in clinical trials, they do better medically than those who don't. Maybe it's the hope factor. Maybe it's all the measurements that get made in clinical trials. But clinical trials aren't perfect. There's certainly not nearly enough of them. As we've talked about, there's a very marked geographic restriction in where these are available. We know that clinical trials often have inclusion-exclusion criteria. And in my experience, these are getting more and more narrow as we start to target subsets of the disease that we think might respond to a particular therapy, meaning more people are excluded. And there are also certain design features that are not acceptable to many PALs. For example, placebos, and also the travel burden that's associated with a lot of these. And so it's been nice to see that expanded access programs have become more common in ALS over the last few years. I think this is a great option, at least theoretically, for people who can't get into trials, but unfortunately there aren't nearly enough of these either. There's even fewer expanded access programs than there are trials, and these are even more restricted in terms of where they're offered. And even with expanded access programs, there are often inclusion-exclusion criteria. And so that leaves the third pathway, which I call self-experimentation. And some studies out there suggest that most, maybe up to 99% of people with ALS around the world are using this pathway. And there's different specific ways to use it. You could get a prescription for an off-label medication from your doctor. You could go through an importation program to get something from another country. You could find a guru and you could buy from that guru. These are called buyers clubs, and they've been around at least since the early days of HIV. There's a great 2013 movie with Matthew McConaughey, a person living with HIV who created his own buyers club in a motel room in Texas. Most commonly nowadays, people find their products that they're going to experiment with through the internet. And there's so many products now on the internet. If you take out your phone and you Google ALS treatment, you'll come up with probably over 100,000 hits. Now, not all of the things you come up with are alternative or off-label treatments, but many of them are. And the thing about the internet, there's a lot of breadth, but there's very little depth to what's on there. And there aren't any internet police to hold people accountable for what they claim. So here's a screenshot from a product that one of my patients asked me about a few years ago, Mototab. It claims to be the world's most relied upon treatment for motor neuron disease. It claims to be clinically proven. It claims to be completely guaranteed. You're at no risk for trying this product. What kind of information was offered at all those links? None. They were all dead ends. And so I heard some chuckles when I put that up there, and it does seem a little silly, except for the fact that people are actually being harmed by pursuing alternative and off-label therapies on the internet. They're being financially harmed. Some of these products cost hundreds, some cost thousands, some cost hundreds of thousands of dollars per treatment. They're being physically harmed. My team has found evidence of infections, blood clots, tumors, people who have gone and purchased stem cells off the grid and came back and developed a tumor. And when that was biopsied, it was comprised of someone else's cells. So what they actually bought were precancerous cells. There have even been deaths in some of these clinics that have continued to advertise themselves as perfectly safe. There's also a scientific harm, because many times I see patients who would be good candidates for a trial or an expanded access program, but instead they decide to self-experiment based on one of these claims from an unusual website, and that harms our enrollment. We don't enroll very well in ALS trials. We enroll about 2 patients per site per month in a trial. And a busy site like mine, we will see 80 to 100 patients in a month, and 2 will enroll in a clinical trial. And that's not good, because it means that our trials are taking longer, they're more expensive, they might be terminated without a result. The bottom line is, because of this, it's going to take us longer to find the cure for ALS than it should. And so, frustrated by all this, in 2009, I got together at this international symposium in the corner with some of my colleagues, and I said, we need to do something about this. And there wasn't really a precedent, so we just kind of brainstormed this idea that we would put together a team of clinicians and scientists that would systematically assess these products. Ultimately, our goal was to help PALs make more informed decisions about them. And this system has evolved over the years, but there's still 3 parts to it. Inputs, where we get our ideas. Investigations or reviews, how we actually decide what to say. And then outputs, how do we get the information back out there? And it all revolves around a website, ALSUntangled.com, .net, .org. We own all those domain names. But the key thing is that our inputs come from people living with ALS around the world. They come through emails, they come through social media, they come from my colleagues in different places who say, I saw a patient today and he asked about this. Could you put it on your list? And so once we have an idea, we put it on the future reviews section of our website. And I can't possibly get a screenshot of all the ideas that are on that page right now. There's over 500 of them. There's far more ideas than I will ever get to in my life. So we've had to come up with a way to prioritize the ideas. And we do it in different ways. First, we let the community vote. So if you see something on that page you're interested in, just go on there and click the vote button, and it moves up 1 notch. But votes can't be the only way that we prioritize. The reason is that some of these things have no useful disclosable information. So if somebody asks me about a clinic somewhere that has no information on their website, and I reach out to the proponent and they say, if you write 1 word, I'll sue you, we're not going to get very far on that investigation. So we have a multiplier. Most things get multiplied by 1, so it's all about the votes. Some things get multiplied by a 0 if we can't find any useful disclosable information. Occasionally, we multiply the votes by 2. That's if there's a published case series or trial. We put together a team, and that team keeps growing. There's now more than 130 clinicians and scientists from across 11 countries working on this every day. And we've had to invent standard operating procedures that try to make everything we do as objective as possible, from how we gather information to how we write, crowdsource, and ultimately publish our drafts. And our standard operating procedures revolve around something we invented and refined over the years called the table of evidence. So we want to know 5 things about each of these products. What's the mechanistic plausibility? What is this thing supposed to do? And does that make any sense based upon what we know about the laws of physics and biology? What does this thing do when it's given to a preclinical model of ALS, a cell or an animal model? What are people who tried it saying? And can we actually prove that those are real people? Can we get their medical records and verify what they're saying? Are there any trials that we can reference? And what bad things could possibly happen to a person who tries this? And how likely are those? And across each of these 5 categories, we assign a letter grade, ranges from A to F. And so just to give you an example of how this works, look at the category case reports. If all we can find are people saying, I tried this, it doesn't do anything, it's going to get an F. If we can find one person on the internet who says they tried it and it gave them benefits, but we can't prove that they're real, we'll give it a D. If we can communicate with that person and get their medical records and verify their diagnosis and their improvement after trying this, it gets a C. If there's more than one person like that, it gets a B. And if there's a published series of patients like that, it gets an A. And once we have a rough draft, we send it out across the world to our ALSUntangled team. That's called crowdsourcing. Everybody gets 2 weeks to send back their comments, and then I have the difficult job of trying to figure out how to incorporate all these comments into the review that we send to the journal, ALS and Frontotemporal Degeneration. That version gets an independent peer review. We respond to that, and then we get published. All of our reviews are published through something called free open access, which means nobody ever has to pay to download them. They're also published on the completed review section of our website, along with a list of the grades that we gave that idea across the 5 categories. Now, we've been doing this for a long time. Some of these reviews are more than a decade old. We've had to update them. And so when you go to that completed review section, if you see an asterisk, that means we've updated that review and there's a new paragraph that's not in the publication. We also understand that not everybody wants to download a scientific article and read it. So we've partnered with the CREATE Consortium out of the University of Miami, and we are now recording podcasts where a person living with ALS will interview me about that idea. And if you see a little speaker icon next to the name of the idea, that means you can listen to the podcast. They tend to be 10 to 15 minutes in length. We've also learned that this hunger to self-experiment is not unique to English-speaking people. And so we've partnered with some folks in Spain and some folks in Italy, and we're now translating our reviews and our podcasts into other languages. Sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? There pretty much hasn't been one night or one weekend in the last 15 years when I haven't, in some way, shape, or form, been working on ALSUntangled. Is it successful? Well, I'll let you be the judge. We've won some awards from patients and from peers. People are reading our reviews. So the journal that we publish in keeps an active list of its most downloaded articles. We've got 8 of the top 10 most downloaded articles in history. Some individual ALSUntangled reviews have over 50,000 downloads, and this series now has over 400,000. And the podcasts, which are pretty recent, they already have over 30,000. I can also tell you that personally, I have grown. I have learned so many interesting things from running this program, and I would love to spend the next hour telling you about all those, but I know I only have a few more minutes, so let me tell you some of the things I've learned about the products. Many of them are junk, and the worst ones that we found share the same problems. I call them the red flags. And so if a person comes into your clinic and says, what about this new thing that's just launched in Montreal, Canada, and we haven't reviewed it yet, ask yourself how many of these 10 red flags are associated with that thing. The more likely it does that this thing doesn't work and that patients should stay away. But we've also found some products that are very promising. Just recently published in the Annals of Neurology, a list of the 8 most promising products that we've reviewed in the last 15 years. And you can see those are acetyl L-carnitine, antiretrovirals, clenbuterol, L-serine, methylcobalamin, nicotinamide riboside with pterostilbene, quinidine with dextromethorphan, and tamoxifen. Each of these have plausible mechanisms by which it could affect ALS. Each has a small flawed trial demonstrating benefit in people with ALS. So to wrap it up, I've shown you today that people living with ALS understandably want experimental options. Trials and expanded access programs are the preferred pathways, but unfortunately there's not enough, and they're too geographically restricted. which means self-experimentation with AOTs is going to be the main pathway people use. When it comes to understanding these products, like they used to say on the X-Files, the truth is out there, but it's not always easy to find. And so ALS Untangled tries to bring the community together to investigate these with the ultimate goal of helping people with the disease make more informed decisions. I do want to add one wrinkle to this before I someday retire. I believe there's a need for one-on-one education for people with ALS around the world. I believe ALS Untangled needs to either partner with a 501c3 or create its own 501c3 and allow people and families to schedule one-on-one conferences with an expert to talk about their questions and get them answered someday. So just want to wrap up by thanking people living with ALS. You're literally the reason I'm still here in this field fighting. You inspire me to fight harder every day. My sponsors, ALS Untangled currently only has one sponsor, that's the ALS Association. So thank you for helping us to continue to put out 6 reviews a year. I'd like to thank all my collaborators, especially the unpaid volunteers that are members of my team. And then lastly, my Duke ALS care team. They helped me build a foundation of great patient care upon which all of these other ideas that I have are based. Thank you.
Thank you. This is now open for questions.
There's a question from Sue, MNDA. If you find a product that might work but has flawed results, do you advise them or point them in a better direction?
It's a complicated question. So when one of my patients comes to my clinic and says, I'm thinking about trying this thing, my first question is, I understand why you want to experiment. Let's see if I've got a trial that you can participate in. If not, let's see if we can get you in an expanded access program. And if all else fails and self-experimentation is your only option, then let's look critically at this idea that you brought. And let's ask ourselves, what does it say about the potential benefits? What are the potential risks that can come to you? And if we're both comfortable with that, then I'll support you and I'll follow you on that product and we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Dr. Bedlack, for everything that you do. Sarah Maguire from ALS Canada. I'm over here.
Hi, Sarah.
I had the good fortune of seeing you speak about the work that you were doing shortly after I'd begun my work in 2010, and it's really inspired me. So one of the things that we actually do, and I kind of wanted to share this with anybody else in the room, one of the things that I had seen early on in my career was by the time that we had clients register with us and we'd gone out into the homes and met them, sometimes they'd already started looking and found dangerous information. So now what we do when a client is registering with us, our first reach out includes a number of resources, including the link to ALS Untangled, hoping that they can get to that before they go anywhere else. And it has been a tremendous support to us and hopefully has pointed many more people in the right direction. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Lee Moore. I'm from the ALS Foundation in the Netherlands. Well, thank you for your interesting talk, and I couldn't agree more with what you just said. I think also patients have a right to this information, so it's great to show them what you're doing with ALS Untangled. We're having a webinar in the Netherlands in February on this topic, together with the Patient Association and with researchers from the ALS Center. And your slides would be very helpful. Are you able to share them with us?
Why don't you take a break?
Happy to share them, and also happy to participate if I haven't already booked myself on some other Zoom meeting that time. So just come and talk to me after. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. Yes, very.
Thanks, everyone.